G'day folks, this week's clip is actually a bit of a re-upload of a clip posted by a good friend of ours a couple of years back, Chris Towerton. G'day Chris. It was from his permaculture design YouTube channel, which he has since closed down, and as a result he'd removed a series of wicking bed clips. Now these clips are fantastic as they go through an explanation of Colin Austin's idea behind the wicking beds and how they work. Not only that, Chris does a fantastic little trial comparing both sand and gravel as a wicking medium in the reservoir of the grow beds themselves. Now I did mention to Chris at a recent catch-up just before Christmas that this clip is sorely missed by myself, as it was a great demonstration on the different wicking mediums or mediums that people use in the reservoirs of their wicking beds, and he graciously offered to let me have the clip so I could edit it a little bit and re-upload it to my channel here. So for that, Chris, I'm very grateful. You know, you didn't have to do this, mate, and I really do appreciate it. So yeah, I do hope you enjoy this clip and the explanation, and also too, I do have a playlist here on YouTube of my own wicking bed creations. If you'd like to check that out, there'll be a link appearing at the end of the clip, and it's also down in the description. So without any further nattering on, I'll leave you in Chris's good hands and hope you enjoy the clip.
Hello, my name is Chris, and thanks for following our urban design. Well, it's about time we bit the bullet and tried to grow some vegetables. This is our back veranda, and it's up here we'll be making our first attempt. There are, however, a few problems with this location, one of which is that it's quite exposed. Up here we get a lot of wind. Our site faces west, so we're not expecting direct sunlight until around noon. Now that's not ideal, but it does remain one of the sunniest locations on our block. We're also anticipating that with the hot midday sun, the drying winds and the retained heat from this wall, that our garden bed will require lots of water. Looking for a solution, we came across an Australian bloke called Colin Austin. In the mid-90s, he developed a form of self-watering garden bed. It looks as though his design might suit us well in this location. In a nutshell, Colin observes that plants irrigated with a light top-down water lose a great deal to evaporation. And while deeper watering begins to wet the root zone, at some point the water will find a fissure in the soil and percolate beyond this zone. In many cases, this leaves behind pockets of dry soil. A garden built with a reservoir to capture this water seems the obvious solution. However, as water travels through the soil, it picks up nutrients on the way, and if this water was allowed to stagnate in the bottom of the reservoir, it's likely to become anaerobic. For this reason, it's generally recommended that any form of container gardening be well drained. However, Colin has discovered that provided long-term water is kept below the root zone, the problem is not the water itself, but that water should become rancid, created by this situation where first in is last out. Sinking a pipe into the reservoir allows water to be delivered directly to the bottom layer, replacing the old. And with this simple modification, Colin has changed the cycle to one of first in, first out. And this ensures the garden has a continuous supply of fresh water. This basic concept of Colin's has been implemented in many ways. Our take is to build an above ground container. First, we shall install a waterproof membrane and pipes to allow us to both fill with and distribute water. To protect against waterlogging our plants, a drain needs fitting just below the height of our grow medium. We can then load the bed with an inorganic material as a placeholder to create the reservoir. Next, a sheet of geotextile can be laid in place to separate the reservoir from the layer above. Our grow medium will sit on top of the geotextile to a depth no greater than 30 centimetres. Finally, we'll finish off the bed with a layer of mulch. Well, in preparation for our garden, we've built this basic raised bed. Now we're expecting it to be quite heavy when it's finished, so both the veranda and the bed have been built keeping this in mind. Now although the wicking bed looks like a relatively simple design, there are a number of choices as to the materials you can use. So to help us out with some of that, we've contacted a fellow YouTuber called Rob. His channel is beingbob01, and he's been kind enough to agree to have a chat with us via the internet. G'day Rob.
G'day Chris.
Well, you've been posting on wicking gardens for a fair while now. What got you started in wicking gardens, and how long's it been since you put in your first bed?
Well, I started playing around with wicking boxes and containers after reading an article by Colin, and it just made sense to us with the drought we were in at the time and the water restrictions to garden more water-wise. So we decided to upscale the idea of the wicking boxes into conventional garden beds. We also had a few other issues. We had a really bad root intrusion from Chinese elms in our own mango trees. They were sucking the life out of the garden beds we already had made. And as we were expanding the existing garden, we also started to come across a few bits and pieces in the soil, like fiberglass sheeting that we weren't too happy with and really didn't want to grow in the soil that contained those sort of items. So we decided that a lined wicking bed was probably the way for us to go, with purchased soil and organic compost, just so we knew what our plants were actually growing in. So that was pretty much all about 4 years ago now, I think we started doing that.
So have you always been a gardener?
I've pretty much all grown up around gardening. I had grandparents who had quite extensive gardens, aunties and uncles, my own parents. And when Bianca and I first got together, we always had herbs, kitchen herbs in a pot. In our last house we rented before we purchased this place, we had quite substantial veggie gardens just grown in large 60 centimetre pots and broccoli boxes. So pretty much we'll always had something in the ground or in the pot growing.
So would you say that wicking gardens were any easier than conventional gardens?
I think it is a little bit easier than gardening in a conventional bed once you have it up and running. Weeding it, you don't really have to bend over that far. We also like to use a very thick layer of mulch, so we don't really have a massive weed problem. And as for watering, you can get away with just filling the reservoir once a week if you want. I prefer to give it a top water probably 2 to 3 times a week, just to give those surface roots some water. And the plants really love you for doing that. So yeah, on the whole, I think it is a little bit easier than a conventional garden.
Now, seeing from some of your clips that you're using sand as the wicking medium, is that a fine or a coarse sand?
I like to use a coarse bedding sand. It's more just because it's cheaper than anything else. We have used the fine sand in the first wicking boxes we made, the broccoli boxes. But yeah, we pretty much will stick with the coarse sand now.
Have you ever used gravel?
No, I haven't used rock in the beds. We do have a wicking barrel at the moment with some 25mm or inch size rock in it at the moment down in the reservoir section, so we'll just see how that goes, and if it works out alright we might think about using rock in some future beds.
Well, I know worms are an integral part of your gardening efforts, and I know Colin Austin was pretty keen on incorporating a worm farm directly into the bed. But I think I remember you saying in some of your early clips that you started out doing that, but you've since abandoned the idea. Why is that?
Yeah, we did have worms and worm towers in there to begin with, but they just weren't eating the food in the little worm station. So one of the reasons I think that is because we dug through a whole heap of mushroom compost and also screened horse manure, a whole heap, into the beds when we made them, and also every year I like to dig more through. So I actually think the worms, between living off the mulch, eating the bottom of the mulch, and the other additives we dig through, has kept them more than happy. I mean, we can dig through the garden now and we still find compost worms up around the surface feeding on the mulch, so they're pretty happy in there. And yeah, we don't generate a lot of vegetable waste, and what we do generate we like to feed to the worms in the worm farm for other fertilizer production.
I've seen some people use pond liners and others builder's plastic when it comes to creating the reservoir. I know you're using builder's plastic and it's a fair bit cheaper than the pond liners, and I'm hoping to use it. But have you had any problems with it at all?
No, I haven't had any problems at all with the 200 builder's plastic, Chris. It's been in there for 4 years. I did take extra care though when I prepared the site and the soil that the plastic sat on. I made sure all the sticks, bits of roots, rocks, they were all taken out, and I also like to put a layer of the bedding sand over it just to make it nice and level, and a bit of a precaution in case there was any sticks or rocks I missed. Also too, I did pay attention to how the tin was cut and joined, so there was no jagged bits sticking out that would also pierce the plastic in the reservoir area at all.
Actually, just this week there's a clip being posted by Permaculture Dan, and it's given us a bit of an idea for our garden. He was saying that he put in a wicking bed for one of his customers, and then later on they wanted to grow some climbing beans or something along that fashion, and they drove in some wooden stakes. Well, of course those stakes went through and pierced the lining, and now he's had to go back and rebuild the bed. So we're wondering maybe it might be a good idea if we were to mount some trellising directly to the bed frame itself.
I think building the trellis into the bed itself is a fantastic idea. It means it's mobile if you ever want to move your bed around. And also too, you could probably make it so you could get a flap of shade cloth down the front, because from what you were saying about the aspect, the position it's in is going to cop a bit of afternoon sun, so that'll probably help take the sting out of it a fair bit.
Okay, well that's about all the questions that we had. Is there anything else we should know?
That's pretty much all it, I suppose. I think you've got it all sorted on the bed side of things.
Okie dokie, well thanks for that, and as you'd usually say, have a great one.
Thanks mate, and you take it easy yourself. Catch ya.
Well, YouTube's a terrific place for grassroots learning, and I'm really glad that Rob was able to give us a hand. We still have one question though, and that concerns the wicking medium itself. As Rob has primarily used sand and the verdict's still out on his gravel experiment, we contacted another bloke here on YouTube called Hamish, whom we know is using gravel. Hamish posts on his channel, Hamish121212, and he builds his wicking beds in IBCs. Turns out though that Hamish has never used sand, so we still don't really have a comparison. For that reason, we borrowed this fish tank from one of our neighbours. In it we intend to do a cheap and cheerful test between the two. We've siliconed a partition here in the middle, and we filled both sides with 100 mils or roughly 4 inches of the competing mediums. But before we get started on the fish tank, it seems good to determine if there's a difference between these two materials in terms of their water holding capacity. Our first bucket has been filled to the 9 litre mark with gravel. Our second and identical bucket has also been filled to the 9 litre mark, and it contains our dry sand. Both buckets have then been filled with water to the 9 litre mark. The sand took 3 litres and the gravel 3.5, so it looks as though our gravel holds around 17% more water than the sand. Here we have some sifted compost. In preparation for this test, it's been well watered and then placed in this barrow where I've turned it for a week in the sun to allow it to dry off. I describe it now as neither being wet nor dry, but consistently moist. I think that's going to give us the best starting point for our comparison. In an effort to keep things even, both of these beds will be filled alternatively, 1 scoop at a time. Well, this is our tank filled with the growing medium set to a depth of 25 centimetres or roughly 10 inches. As we've filled it up, we've lightly tapped that down so that there's better connectivity between the compost particles and hopefully better wicking. The big surprise though was before we'd even finished filling it, the water level in our sand reservoir has already dropped below the halfway point. So in the space of about 40 minutes, it's already fallen 2.5 inches. Our gravel on the other hand is still yet to fall an inch, so there's already some disparity there. The keen eye though will spot that behind our convoluted tubing there's a small piece of geotextile to stop our viewing window filling up with sand. However, I believe that the water level here would be representative of the water level right the way through our sand, and I don't believe the geotextile is affecting that level by that much. Well, both of our wicking mediums occupy an identical amount of space. Now by volume that works out to be about 15 litres. Using the results from our bucket test, it would seem as though the sand holds approximately 5 litres and the gravel 6. 48 hours in and the sand reservoir has reclaimed some of its original volume and risen slightly to 50%, with 2.5 litres having been transferred into the growing medium. At 60% the gravel has transferred 2.4 litres. By day 23 our sand has finished. At this point the gravel isn't too far behind on 28%, having given up 4.7 litres. The gravel finally comes to an end on the 54th day. Well, as our sand reservoir was coming to an end, the grow medium above our gravel here had wicked a similar amount of water. So I guess in that sense they were running pretty much on par. At that time the air gap between the top of the water and the bottom of the grow medium in the gravel here was about 7 centimetres or just under 3 inches. It was from then on though where the gravel really slowed down, taking an additional 31 days to release the last 1.3 litres of water. I'm guessing that somewhere along the line the wicking process ceased and one of evaporation took over. We also noticed that after the test was running, 20 millimetres of this grow medium had dipped down into our 100 millimetres or 4 inches set up for the gravel reservoir. Now if that affected our results by 20 millimetres, it would mean that this gravel wicking process was really only good for about 50 millimetres or 2 inches. Now, I guess our results here aren't necessarily indicative of all gravels and certainly not finer ones, nor too the way that that gravel is used. For instance, I know that Hamish is wrapping his gravel right to the bottom in geotextile. Now I'm guessing that'd help quite a bit in wicking that water up to the grow medium. Where I'd need a little bit more convincing though is how well that water would distribute to, say, maybe the centre of a 9-foot square garden. One of the other advantages to sand is the speed at which it wicks. Now I'm guessing there'll be times in the future where we forget to fill the reservoir, and we probably won't notice until the plants have wilted. And it's nice as a result of this test knowing that having filled the reservoir, at least the bottom root should have access to that water probably within the hour. So I guess then the conclusion to our test here, for us at least, is that we'll be using sand.
So there's actually a part 2 to this video, and I will be releasing that sometime next week. So if you want to catch up on that one or any of the further clips that I post to the channel, being about the garden plans that we have in the future and the aquaponics and whatnot, all you need to do is hit that little subscribe button down there and then check the bell icon once it appears, and YouTube will send you notifications once I upload clips to the channel. That part 2, by the way, is actually looking at the build itself, and Chris was gracious enough to film a bit of a harvest clip that I'm going to tack on the end, just so you can see that the bed is still up and running and how well it's producing for them. As always, I really do need to thank you folks who are supporting the channel through the Farm Your Own Yard website or the YouTube supporter or membership page. Thank you very much, folks. You can check out the super contributors. Their links are down in the description below, and yeah, it'd be great if you could go along and see what they're all about by clicking on their links. And for you folks who want to know what Farm Your Own Yard is all about, there will be a link right at the end of the clip here too for you to suss out, so you can see yeah, different ways you can support the channel, not necessarily monetarily. So I will leave it there. I do hope you're all well and happy, and your gardens and aquaponics are booming, and I will catch you next clip. Cheers, folks.